Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. This is Captain BINOY Assistant Professor, Department of English, St. Joseph's College, Allegory, Kerala. This is the fourth and final video of the series of lectures on Plato's The Republic. In the previous three lectures, we have had a discussion of the biographical details of Plato. Also, we looked into book 1 and book 2 and book 3, and in this lecture we are discussing book 4 to 10. Besides, in the first part of this lecture we are looking at the most significant questions based on book 2 and 3 of the Republic of Plato. Say this lecture is meant for the postgraduate MA English students of the colleges of University of Calicut. So we have to consider, in fact, book 2 and 3 are prescribed for the students, and hence we are looking at the most significant questions that can come for the examination, and these questions are also very significant for the University Grants Commission's NET and JRF examination. Okay, so some of the significant questions. Number 1 is which are the important definitions of justice we come across in book 1 of the Republic. Second question, Glaucon's challenge of Socrates' definition of justice, or rather, how does Glaucon challenge Socrates? Next, what is the political metaphor in the Republic? And what does Socrates say about, or what does Plato say about the character and education of the guardians of the ideal city? And what is the legend of the ring of Gyges, the story of the ring of Gyges? Then what is the myth of the metals? Why does Socrates say Plato say the myth of metals? Then which are the 3 classes of people in the city, and why it pays to be just? Besides, we have questions like, what kind of good does Socrates say justice is? And answer, of course, is Socrates says justice is a good that is valued for its own sake, not for what it can provide. Another question, does Glaucon believe men are at heart good or evil? How does he illustrate his point? Glaucon believes men are inherently evil. The story of Gyges is the answer that helps us to substantiate this point of view of Glaucon. Next question, why does Socrates look at the community first? A very important question. Why does Socrates look at the community first? Socrates looks at the community first in order to see justice more clearly by looking at it on the large scale. Okay, so these are some of the important questions that we need to consider while learning book 2 and 3 in detail. Now we come to the discussion of the subsequent chapters in the Republic. We have so far discussed 3 chapters in detail, and okay, in this lecture we are discussing book 4 to 10. So now let's look at the content of book 4. Socrates points out that in the city they are building with their stories. Everyone must be equally happy. No one must be happy at the expense of another person. They must deal with each portion separately in order to maintain balance. There will be no money in the city, so there will be no wealth or poverty. Adeimantus points out that a city without revenue cannot defend itself, but Socrates says that the city would have the best trained guardians and neighboring cities would be happy to help if they were promised all the spoils of battle. Socrates wants the city to not grow too large. The guardians would share equally in all things, including wives and children. There would be no need of laws because their closely guarded education would keep them on a morally straight path. Now the just city is ready. Since it is the best city possible, it will definitely have the 4 virtues: wisdom, courage, moderation, and justice. Wisdom comes from the guardians who run the city. Courage must be found in the men who actually fight for the city. Moderation is used in choosing the rules, and justice is found in the laws that state that everyone provide the job for the betterment of the city by doing what job they are best suited for. The perfectly just city is designed. Now, what about a person? So, this is the important argument in Book 4, and having established the tripartite soul, Socrates defines the virtue of the individual. A person is wise if he is ruled by the part of the soul that knows what is beneficial for each part and for the whole. Courageous if his spirited part preserves the midst of pleasures and pains the decisions reached by the rational part, and temperate if the 3 parts agree that the rational part lead. They are just if each part of the soul attends to its function and not the function of another. It follows from this definition that one cannot be just if one doesn't have the other cardinal virtues. So with that we come to the end of the discussion of Book 4, and now we move on to Book 5. Before Socrates can continue in his discussion of the just city and the just soul, he is interrupted by Polemarchus and Adeimantus. They want some further explanation on the sharing of wives and children by the guardians. Socrates states that women would receive the same training as men. They would learn politics and guardianship. He believes that women can be just as spirited, intelligent, and rational as men, and the perfect city would treat them as equals. Males and females would only mate during fixed times of the year. Those times would be known as festivals. They would only be wed for about how long the intercourse lasts. A particularly attractive person or a person wanting to reproduce could be married as many as 5 times in a single festival. The father of any children would be unknown, so their children would be taken from the parents and raised together. Sex between festivals would be forbidden, and any children born from those unions killed. To avoid incest, everyone must consider any child born within 7 and 10 months of copulation to be their child, and all children would look at the children born within that span of time as brothers and sisters. This would ensure a unified city. In most cities, people care about their city, but care more about their family. In this city, everyone is family. The city shares all goals and concerns before his students can ask more questions about this arrangement and whether asking people to forgo wealth, family ties, and romance is feasible. Socrates adds more to his perfect guardians. Children should accompany their trainers to war so they can learn how it is done like any other apprentice would. but they should be on horseback and able to retreat quickly in case of defeat. Also, anyone who acts cowardly should be stripped of their title of guardian. Then he goes on to explain what should be done to an army after they are defeated and how to deal with prisoners. If they are Greek, they should not be made slaves and their land should not be destroyed. Someday, all Greece will be united again. But barbarians or any people who are in Greek, the story is different. His guardians would make the barbarians slaves and treat them however they liked. So with that we come to the end of book 5. We move on to book 6. Since only true philosophers can have knowledge, they are obviously the best sources of finding out what is good for the city and would be in the best position to correctly govern and maintain the sanctity of the city. Socrates' friends agree that if we could be sure that the philosophers were virtuous, or at the very least not below others in their virtue, it would be sure that they were the ones best tailored for ruling. Luckily, because we know that a philosopher loves truth and strives to uphold it, they are more virtuous than the average lay person. The word philosopher, in fact, means lover of truth or wisdom. The rational part of a philosopher's soul must then rule his mind, and therefore his soul remains just. Adeimantus is not convinced by this, as he has never met a philosopher like the one Socrates is describing. He remains in the camp that most philosophers are lazy and useless, and the ones that aren't are mean and spiteful. Surprisingly, Socrates actually agrees with Adeimantus on this. However, he does argue that the current batch of contemporary philosophers have not been raised in what he deems to be the right way. Any man born today with a natural philosophical nature, that is a man with a quick wit, a lofty sensibility and high mind, a courageous nature and a strong memory, is bound to be quickly beset by family and friends looking to make something for themselves out of his natural gift. Often they are forced into politics by their lecherous family and friends so that they may obtain money and power. Due to this, inevitably they are brought away from any sort of philosophical life. In their stead, others who lack their natural gift are brought into act as philosophers when they ought not to be. These are the ones who turn out mean and spiteful. The few who turn out to be good philosophers, those whose natures remain uncorrupted, are thought of as being useless because society as a whole has become immoral. Socrates here makes a comparison to a ship whose owner is deaf, blind, and lacks any seafaring capabilities. The sailors of the ship begin to fight over who should be the true captain, though in truth none of them are qualified. Because they are unskilled, they end up using brute strength and trickery to convince the ship's owner to name them captain. Whoever succeeds is called captain, while the others are called useless, though they all use the same tricks to get what they wanted. Socrates says that the true captain in this scenario would probably be the most useless stargazer of them all, as he is only one that knows anything about navigation. Athens' current situation, he continues, is much like this scenario. Most people do not realize that there is any kind of real knowledge to be had, but instead most use tricks and clever chicanery to get ahead. The only good philosophers are seen as being useless. Socrates concludes by saying that all that they need to create a good philosopher is one person who is educated in just the right way and will properly grasp the forms. He believes that this is not impossible. Now we move on to book 7. At the beginning of book 7, Socrates lays out the most poignant and perhaps one of the most famous metaphors in all Western philosophy, the allegory of the cave. It's a very important metaphor in Western philosophy and in the discussion of the Republic or Plato. And he describes a scene of several prisoners tied up in a dark cave. They have been tied up for their whole lives and are tied in such a way that they can only see straight ahead of them. The prisoners have only ever known the cave and the shadows that come from the statues around them cast by the fire on the wall. These prisoners are meant to represent imagination, which is the lowest stage on the line. One day, a prisoner is freed from his bonds and brought close to the fire. He is made to look at the statues themselves. This astounds the prisoner. He suddenly realizes that the shadows that he has taken to be the only reality for his entire life are not only a pale reflection of the statues. He begins to see how the combination of the fire and the statues casts the shadows. He thinks that the statues, the fire, and the cave are the only real things and does not grasp that there is still a world outside the cave. This is the belief stage on the line. And now we move on to book 8. Socrates discusses 4 unjust constitutions. They are timocracy, oligarchy, democracy, and tyranny. He argues that, and let's understand what timocracy. Timocracy is a form of government in which rulers are ambitious, and oligarchy is a kind of government in which we have a small group of people having control of a country. And democracy, we know democracy is of course like we have in the definition of Abraham Lincoln, it is for the people, by the people, and of the people. That is of course what is democracy. And now we have tyranny. We know tyranny is cruel and oppressive rule or government. Okay, and now let us see what Socrates has to say about these 4 unjust constitutions. Okay, so Socrates argues that a society will decay and pass through each government in succession, eventually becoming a tyranny, the most unjust regime of all. The starting point is an imagined alternate aristocracy ruled by a philosopher king, a just government dominated by the wisdom-loving element. When its social structure breaks down and enters civil war, it is replaced by timocracy. The timocratic government is dominated by the spirited element, with a ruling class of property owners consisting of warriors or generals. Ancient Sparta is an example. As the emphasis on honor is compromised by wealth accumulation, it is replaced by oligarchy. The oligarchic government is dominated by the desiring element, in which the rich are the ruling class. The gap between rich and poor widens, culminating in a revolt by the underclass majority, establishing a democracy. Democracy emphasizes maximum freedom, so power is distributed evenly. It's also dominated by the desiring element, but in an undisciplined, unrestrained way. The populism of the democratic government leads to mob rule, fueled by fear of oligarchy, which a clever demagogue can exploit to take power and establish tyranny. In a tyrannical government, the city is enslaved to the tyrant, who uses his guards to remove the best social elements and individuals from the city to retain power, since they pose a threat, while leaving the worst. He will also provoke warfare to consolidate his position as leader. In this way, tyranny is the most unjust regime of all. In parallel to this, Socrates considers the individual or soul that corresponds to each of these regimes. He describes how an aristocrat may become weak or detached from political and material affluence, and how his son will respond to this by becoming overly ambitious. The timocrat, in turn, may be defeated by the court's or vested interests. His son responds by accumulating wealth in order to gain power in society and defend himself against the same predicament, thereby becoming an oligarch. The oligarch's son will grow up with wealth without having to practice thrift or stinginess, and will be tempted and overwhelmed by his desires, so that he becomes democratic, valuing freedom above all. That is the end of book 8, and now we move on to book 9. Having discussed the tyrannical constitution of a city, Socrates wishes to discuss the tyrannical constitution of a psyche. This is all intended to answer Thrasymachus' first argument in book 1, that the life of the unjust man, here understood as a tyrant, a true tyrant, is more blessed than that of the just man, the philosopher king. So, the unjust man is a tyrant, and the just man is a philosopher king. That is very, very important when we discuss the Republic of Plato. First, he describes how a tyrannical man develops from a democratic household. The democratic man is torn between tyrannical passions and oligarchic discipline, and ends up in the middle ground, valuing all desires, both good and bad. The tyrant will be tempted in the same way as the democrat, but without an upbringing in discipline or moderation to restrain him. Therefore, his most base desires and wildest passions overwhelm him, and he becomes driven by lust, using force and fraud to take whatever he wants. The tyrant is both a slave to his lusts and a master to whomever he can enslave. Because of this, tyranny is the regime with the least freedom and happiness, and the tyrant is most unhappy of all. Since the regime and soul correspond, his desires are never fulfilled, and he always must live in fear of his victims, because the tyrant can only think in terms of servant and master. He has no equals whom he can befriend, and with no friends, the tyrant is robbed of freedom. Maybe like in the Emperor Johns of Eugene O'Neill. This is the first proof that it is better to be just than unjust. The second proof is derived from the tripartite theory of soul. The wisdom-loving soul is best equipped to judge what is best through reason, and the wise individual judges wisdom to be best, then honor, then desire, This is the just proportion of the city or soul and stands opposite to tyranny, which is entirely satiated on base desires. The third proof follows from this. It describes how the soul can be misled into experiencing false pleasure. For example, a lack of pain can seem pleasurable by comparison to a worse state. True pleasure is fulfilled by things that fit one's nature. Wisdom is the most fulfilling and is the best guide. So the only way for the three drives of the soul to function properly and experience the truest pleasure is by allowing wisdom to lead. To conclude this proof, the wisdom element is the best at providing pleasure, while tyranny is worse because it is furthest removed from wisdom. Finally, Socrates considers the multiple of how much worse tyranny is than the kingly, disciplined, wise temperament, and even quantifies the tyrant as living 729 times more painfully, less joyfully than the king. He then gives the example of a chimera to further illustrate justice and the tripartite soul. The discussion concludes by refuting Thrasymachus' argument and designating the most blessed life as that of the just man and the most miserable life as that of the unjust man. Example, maybe we can say the story of Macbeth or the story of the Emperor John's. Now we come to the last and final chapter of the Republic. Okay, concluding a theme brought up most explicitly in the analogies of the sun and divided line in Book 6, Socrates finally rejects any form of imitative art. Okay, be very sure about it. He is just rejecting any form of imitative art and concludes that such artists have no place in the just city. So this is the most important idea we have in the Republic about the role of artists in the just city of Plato. It is said that he is rejecting imitative art, and because of that reason, artists have no place in the ideal city or the Republic of Plato. He continues on to argue for the immortality of the psyche and even espouses a theory of reincarnation. He finishes by detailing the rewards of being just, both in this life and the next. Artists create things, but they are only different copies of the idea of the original. And whenever anyone informs us that he has found a man who knows all the arts and all things else that anybody knows, and every single thing with a higher degree of accuracy than any other man, whoever tells us this, I think that we can only imagine to be a simple creature who is likely to have been deceived by some wizard or actor whom he met, and whom he thought all-knowing, because he himself was unable to analyze the nature of knowledge and ignorance and imitation. And the same object appears straight when looked at out of the water, and crooked when in the water, and the concave becomes convex owing to the illusion about colors to which the sight is liable. Thus every sort of confusion is revealed within us, and this is that weakness of the human mind on which the art of conjuring and deceiving by light and shadow and other ingenious devices imposes, having an effect upon us like magic. He speaks about illusions and confusion. Things can look very similar but be different in reality because we are human. At times we cannot tell the difference between the two, that is illusions and reality. And does not the same hold also of the ridiculous? There are jests which you would be ashamed to make yourself, and yet on the comic stage or indeed in private, when you hear them, you are greatly amused by them and are not at all disgusted at their unseemliness. The case of pity is repeated. There is a principle in human nature which is disposed to raise a laugh, and this which you once restrained by reason because you were afraid of being thought a buffoon is now let out again. And having stimulated the risible faculty at the theatre, you are betrayed unconsciously to yourself into playing the comic poet all the time. This is how he condemned drama. With all of us, we may approve of something as long as we are not directly involved with it. If we joke about it, we are supporting it. Quite true, he said. And the same may be said of lust and anger and all the other affections of desire and pain and pleasure, which are held to be inseparable from every action. In all of them, poetry feeds and waters the passions instead of drying them up. She lets them rule, although they ought to be controlled. If mankind are ever to increase in happiness and virtue, sometimes we let our passions rule our actions or way of thinking, although they should be controlled so that we can increase our happiness. So in the last book, book 10, we see how Plato is looking at artists, poetry and drama. Okay, rather what's his attitude to art, why, and we understand that he is not in favor of art. He has a lot of charges against art. He says that art does not help the individual to mold character. Art does not promote the well-being of the society. And under, of course, on three grounds, he condemns poetry and art. So number one is his idea of the poetic inspiration. Number two, the emotional appeal of poetry. And number three, the non-moral character of poetry. And because of all this reason, and he says again that the function of poetry must be morality, not pleasure. But it doesn't happen. And because of this reason, he hates, of course, he says that no room, there must not be art or poets in the ideal republic. And now with that we come to the end of the discussion of the Republic of Plato. And now, of course, this is the fourth and the final video. And if you haven't watched the earlier three videos, please go to those three videos. Video 1 is on Plato, biographical details of Plato, and book 1 in video 1. Video 2, we have a very detailed discussion of book 2 of the Republic. Video 3, we have a very detailed discussion of book 3, and this is the final video. And in the beginning of this video, we have just included the most significant questions also. And now let me tell you, my dear subscribers and students and friends, we will be just having more lectures on Longinus, on Aristotle. We are discussing, of course, the Poetics of Aristotle. It is going to be uploaded very soon. Besides, we shall have a discussion of the sublime, the concept of sublimity of Longinus. And you should, if you find these lectures useful, please like, and you can comment. If you have confusion or some doubts, please post your doubts as comment below, and of course I'll try to answer your questions, your doubts, clarify your doubts, and be helpful to you. And I request you, if you find these lectures useful, please like these video lectures, please share it with your friends, teachers, please share it with your students, and ensure that they get enough material, of course, to prepare for their examination. So thanks a lot for listening to me. May God bless you all. Bye bye, everybody.